for melodic heavy metal. Playing it heavier, louder, raunchier, faster. This is the Signals of Intuition.
You better get ready, 'cause I got news for you. Girl, I'm not wasting time.
That was the Defiants right there with their track Love and Bullets off of their brand new record. That band featuring members of Danger Danger, Canadian Paul Lane on vocals, and his former bandmates Bruno Ravel and Rob Marcello. You're listening to the Signals of Intuition, your home for melodic hard rock and heavy metal. And tonight on the show, we have the singer of that band, Mr. Paul Lane, who you would better know from Danger Danger, as well as his solo album from the early 90s, which got quite a bit of airplay on Much Music back in the day. So let's get Paul on the line right now.
Hello.
Hey, Paul, it's Brandon from the Signals of Intuition. How you doing?
Good, man. How you doing, Brandon?
Oh, I'm doing all right. So you're based out of, where is it? Is it Vancouver?
Yeah, I actually live on Vancouver Island.
Oh, okay, right on. Yeah, I saw the area code, and I'm like, where on earth is that? But I remember, I know at least back in the day you were from Vancouver, so you still live in that area still, eh?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I grew up on the island, and years ago I bought a house here, and when I got the job, I just kept it through all the years that I, worked in New York and held on to it, and yeah. I mean, I'm glad I didn't sell it now.
So if you don't mind, I'd like to sort of start at the beginning of you as a musician and then work our way up to the new Defiants record. So first things first, where did you grow up and how did you get into music?
Well, I grew up on Vancouver Island. I grew up in a little town called Qualicum Beach. And I got into music. I actually lived next door to a kid named Phil Dwyer. I mean, and I got to explain to you, Qualicum Beach is in the middle of nowhere. And this kid was the only kid I could play with. I think he just received the Order of Canada for music. He's made a hell of a career as a jazz musician. So he was the only kid I knew. And it was like growing up next to Mozart. So that was kind of my early musical influences. And I knew from day one that this is what I wanted to do.
And now, do you have any musical training? Like, obviously, you grew up with, was it Phil? Was that his name?
Yeah, Phil Dwyer.
With Phil, yeah. So, like, do you have any musical training? Did you take lessons and that kind of thing? Or?
Well, I wasn't really allowed to have music in my house growing up as a kid. So I actually struck up a deal with a lady that lived down the road to take piano lessons off of her. I made a deal with her when I was 9 that I would, like, mow her lawns and weed her gardens and whatever, and she'd fit me in 20 minutes after school so my parents wouldn't find out, like literally on the walk home. So I actually learned to play music in secret from my parents. And when I got into what we call middle school, music was part of the program, and so I couldn't be denied music anymore. So I had a great band teacher named Bill Cave. I started playing trumpet when I was 11, and he put me on to playing bass guitar, and that was kind of the start of it all.
Now, what bands influenced you growing up? Like, where did your sound and all that come from if you weren't really allowed to have music around growing up?
Well, the thing is that I wasn't allowed rock and roll music, but in my house, this is embarrassing. I had the only records my parents had were like, all the musicals, The Sound of Music, My Fair Lady, Oklahoma, all of that stuff. I think about it now and I go, that's like the most melodic music in the world. And I think from very early childhood, melody was a giant thing for me. And then when I discovered rock and roll, I had this teacher at school, again, when I was in grade 5, who found out that I never had listened to rock and roll. And he started bringing me in records. And he'd go, here's the classroom. I'll lock it up for you at lunch, and I'll bring you in my records, and the room's all yours. So he brought me in a record player and brought me in Beatles records and, kind of started me at the beginning. And then later, just as I got a little bit older, obviously in middle school, all the kids started having cassette Walkmans. Remember those?
Oh, yeah. Yep.
And I started, hearing everything else, like Cheap Trick and Loverboy, and it just blew my mind. So that's kind of it.
Yeah, so take me through this kind of journey of you being a kid, who's learning, in secret, and how do you start to, like join bands, and how do we sort of get to where you're doing your first record with Elektra?
Okay. Look, I left home, like I was an adopted kid and a foster kid, and I left home at 13. I had a job, and I think, this is sort of part of the story. I think what made me so independent and able to kind of go after the things that I wanted to go after. I started playing in club bands when I was 15 because I no longer lived at home, and I had a job, and actually the courts, I had no legal guardianship, really. I could do pretty much what I wanted. So I started playing in nightclubs. The scene was a lot different back then. When I was 15, there was a million clubs to play. There was actually a circuit. So I hooked up with all these older guys, fronted their band till I was about 17, and basically cut my teeth and learned, what it was like to be on the road and to front a band, and also to learn that this is not what I wanted to do in that way. I always knew that I wanted to write. I've been writing since I was a little kid. I mean, not anything good, but I knew that that's what I wanted to do. So when I was 17, I teamed up with a pal of mine. We started our first company because I had no money. And we ended up raising $70,000 in like 1980, 81, somewhere around there.
How do you go from being like a 17-year-old kid of raising that kind of capital? That's crazy.
Well, a good line of bullshit. And here was... you wanted the story, so I'm going to give you the story.
Of course. Let's hear it.
How it worked was, because I'd been playing the clubs, a lot of people had seen me, a lot of older people in my, you're 17, everyone's older. And so I knew all these loggers and fishermen. I live on the West Coast. And so my line of selling shares in my company was that I should be able to pay you back better than what you would invest in our RRSP. And it worked, and I think that, I think that a lot of people thought I had some moxie, and I think some people saw that there was some talent there, and so that's the money that I used to fund making my first record and going to L.A. and shopping for a record deal, because I knew I had bought a book called The Platinum Rainbow, and it just was kind of like a user's guide. It was kind of like the Bible on if you wanted to understand what publishing deals were, what record deals were, how the music industry worked. And that literally was my Bible. And it made me think about, I kind of looked at what everyone else was doing when I was a kid, and I said, okay, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to do something completely different. And that was completely different for me, was the fact that, hey, start a company, get funded, go in the studio, make a record so that regardless if you don't get a record deal, I at least had an independent record that I could release and then go on the road with. And I was lucky when I went down to L.A. First of all, it was very, very tough to get into record labels back then, as I'm sure it is now. But, I kind of used the same set of street smarts to get noticed by the labels. And that ended up with getting me 3 record deals on the table. And I got very, very lucky that my songs got the ear of Bruce Fairbairn, who at that time was pretty much the world's biggest record producer with all the Bon Jovi and Aerosmith records.
Oh, of course.
Stuff going. And, right, and he was a Vancouver guy, too. So, and because of that, I got the ear of Bruce Allen, who, basically
Brian Adams, and I mean, he was almost a Canadian record industry back then. I mean, he was very powerful producer.
So that helped me out greatly to have kind of all those people in my corner going, this kid's good.
So obviously for the first album, you team up with Bruce. Tell me sort of, what sort of went around the making of that record? Because, I mean, you've got a bunch of, well-known session guys on there like John Webster and Mickey Curry. And just tell me what it was like kind of working with those guys and how that record all came together.
Sure. Well, first of all, I started pre-production on the record while Aerosmith was making Pump. And so this is my introduction into the studio world. So Fairbairn invites me down, and I'm watching Steven Tyler go to work every day. And then on the breaks, in between the Aerosmith recordings, Fairbairn and I would meet in a break room and go through, what demos I had done, basically working up the songs that would be, end up becoming the Stick It In Your Ear record. But in the meantime, I'm getting the education of standing there watching Aerosmith work, and the whole while I'm thinking, it was the first time I ever kind of got cold feet, because you see these guys work and you realize I'm not that good. I thought I was good right up until I had gotten a record deal and, arrived at my first day at Little Mountain. But then watching those guys work made me really realize how much I had to learn. And, Steven Tyler was pretty sweet. He taught me a lot of things too, and taught me how to think about melody in a different way, and he taught me how to sort of clear the blockage songwriting-wise, and use approach that I still use to this day. So it was kind of like going to university and doing 4 years in 3 months for me.
That's incredible. What now? This thing you're talking about, clearing the blockage. How does that work? Like, can you actually put that into words? How that works for you, sort of songwriting-wise, or is that just kind of something?
Sure, I can explain a little bit of it. Basically, it works like this. Like, a lot of songwriters will, they'll kind of start painting over lyrics and melody and trying to write them all together. Watching Steven Tyler work was like, he sang nonsense. And he sang nonsense to the very end of the record. Like, so for instance, when he was making Pump, there were very few lyric lines. He had all the melody. He would sing just nonsensical lyrics over, the instrumentation that was there. And then at the very end of the record, he would take, 6 weeks and actually just write to the nonsense that he had sung. And it pretty much follows it phonetically, too. It made a lot of sense to me when I went back and started listening to Aerosmith, because he's a very brilliant lyric writer. I could never understand, why it had all these rhythms and things to it. Is because he cleared the log jams. He just sang whatever he instinctually felt and then wrote the lyrics to that, instead of my process. And a lot of writers' process is to sit there and go, okay, I'm stuck on the first line. I'm going to keep hammering out this line till it's right. Then I'm going to move to the second line. Yeah, I got a bit of the melody, but, I'm going to paint over these lyrics. He's like, no. Write the entire song. You know where it needs to go. You know where the melody needs to go. Worry about the lyrics later. And chances are, if you just work instinctively, sing the first thing that comes out of your body, like the way he worked, it was amazing. He just would look at Joe Perry and sing him a guitar part. No, it's got to go like this. And without thinking, right? So I work that same way now. Ever since I was, 20 and hanging around those guys, that's kind of the influence that it had. And I still, at the very end of the record is when I write all the lyrics, and I just follow the patterns that I sung, and I trust my judgment. Because generally when you're writing, your first idea, if you're any good and you're good with your instincts, your first idea is always the right one.
Oh, absolutely. No, that's funny you describing that way, because that's exactly my own process when it comes to songwriting as well. So that's what I find too, is just, his kind of sing nonsense, just get the melody out of you and then go back and flesh it out and actually come up with some proper lyrics there.
Yeah, I think sometimes you can get confused on, when I was a kid, I just thought the artist part, no. It's, you've got to hone your craft and you've got to do it in the moment. And it taught me a new meaning of what in the moment actually meant. No, in the moment means following through your idea to the very end, no matter what, and then go back, because you can get log jammed, right, if you just get stuck on a 2-bar segment.
Oh, for sure. And so now you're in the studio doing pre-production with Bruce, and then what happens now is it label who brought in all these extra guys like Mickey Curry and all the rest of them, or how did the whole recording process work?
No, that was all, you got to remember that Bruce Fairbairn, and the time that I was working with him, was the biggest guy. It's basically him and Bob Rock were the Platinum Twins. So that was Fairbairn's doing. He said, look, I want to do your record, but I also want to do it my way. So I'll decide which players in your band can play on the record and for which parts, but I want Mickey to be the drummer on the record. And I had no problem with that, because Mickey was one of my favorite drummers in the world at the time. Like, I'm sitting there going, are you kidding me? Yes, please. And then Rene Wurst, he had worked with on some other projects, the bass player, because, Bruce Fairbairn was a trumpet player, right? And so he loved all this kind of, he loved jazz and he loved fusion and all that kind of stuff. And Rennie was in a band called Skywalk, and Fairbairn loved his playing, so he brought him to play bass on the record. And then I ended up doing almost all of the guitars myself, which was a shock even to me. So
then you are a pretty decent guitar player, because I know you kind of play guitar, but you're known obviously as being a singer. So I didn't realize you were that accomplished as a guitar player.
Yeah, I played the thing is I just always wanted to be Eddie Van Halen. I never wanted to be a singer. I wanted to be like the guy that wrote the songs and played guitar. So most of my childhood, I just spent writing and playing guitar as much as possible, obviously idolizing Eddie Van Halen, who didn't back then. And even when I got a record deal, I was convinced that I would find a singer and just be the guitar player. So I was a much better guitar player back in the Stick It days. And now, on all my records, I just play rhythm. I don't do a lot of lead playing anymore, but just because there's guys that can play circles around you and make your song sound better, I would rather have them. I approach every album from the songwriter, producer approach first, rather than getting my guitar parts on the record for my own ego, I guess.
Yeah. It's a friend of mine says it exactly that way. He says, at the end of the day, all I care about is what comes out of the speakers.
Right.
It's not about egos. It's about what is the listener hearing at the end of the day.
Sure, man. Yeah, that's the crafting part, right? You want to build the best thing. Every song that you write, you got to have that passion for it, and that it's got to be the best thing that it possibly can be. Otherwise, it's going to haunt you, man. It'll haunt you forever if you don't do a good job.
Yeah. Because 20 years later, you're looking back, you're not remembering the session. You're just putting on the album and going, what on earth was I doing there, right?
And come on, Brandon, man, no one else cares except you. Nobody cares
exactly.
about that weird note and that drum fill that should have been something else. No one else hears it, but you hear it. So I know in the early 90s you sang some vocals on Point of Powers, It's About Time. I don't even know you sang on it until the other day when I was doing research for this interview. How did you become involved with that record? Well, there's a guy, and you know what? I just sort of barely remember that, but I remember my friendship with Don Wilkes. Don Wilkes was a singer. He was in a band called White Wolf, and then he started a band called, I think it was called Giant, and then they got a cease and desist order, and then it turned into Point of Power. So I had admired Donnie. I thought he was a great singer, and I would see his band playing in the clubs. So Donnie and he asked me to come into the recording studio to sing. I just sang backgrounds on it. And I returned the favor when I got the Poison record to do the Flesh and Blood album to sing backups on. I asked Fairburn if I could bring in the singer named Don Wilkes to sing backgrounds as well, and he did. So Donnie and I ended up doing some work together on that, and I think the Scorpions we worked on together as well.
Which Scorpions album? Okay, I got to hear about the Scorpions now.
Face the Heat. Obviously, after I started working with Bruce Fairburn, I shouldn't say obviously, but after I started working with Bruce liked, how I stack background vocals, and, I kind of had an ability to do that and had an ear for harmonies and stuff. So he invited me to start singing on all the records that he produced when I was in town. So I got the Poison Flesh and Blood record, and then he offered me the Scorpions record after that, which I was psyched. Like, no disrespect to Poison, I was not excited to sing on that record. I had no idea what it was. Obviously, it became a giant album, and to this day, I'm very proud to have sung on the record. But I was like a musical snob when I was in my early 20s. So when I got a call, I got the call to do the Poison record, I was like, oh. But when I got a call to do the Scorpions record, I was so nervous I wanted to throw up. Like, honestly, because they were heroes of mine. I'm like, I'm going to get to sing with Klaus? Are you kidding me? So, yeah, I was invited down to work on the Scorpions record. And again, how it worked back in those days is Bruce would say, I want you to come in and hang out for a couple weeks before we cut the background vocals. I want you to meet the guys, because some of them are going to be singing on the record with you. So that was it. I showed up at the, do we have time? Can I tell you a Scorpion story?
Of course. Oh, yep, I got loads of time. Go for it.
All right, so I show up day one, and Fairburn's not there, but Erwin Musper, who's the same guy who was the engineer on my record, he's there, and he's from Holland, and he speaks German. And so everybody's speaking German because the engineer is speaking German, and I show up, and everybody starts speaking English because they have good manners, and I'm in the room. So I meet everybody, and Matthias is sitting there in the studio, and Erwin looks at me and he goes, things are kind of tense today. And I go, should I leave? And he goes, no, just hang on. We're just having a problem with the guitars. So I go, well, what seems to be the problem? He goes, well, Matthias thinks that there's something wrong with the hydro inside Little Mountain, something wrong with the power. And I go, all right. So I walk out into the live room, and he's holding this one note, boo, right, until it dies out. And he's like, see, there's no sustain. The notes will not hold. There's a problem with the hydro. So all the engineers are running around. Now, mind you, he's got a giant rig, right? Like 4 marshals, some wizard heads, some other things. So they're like, let's go move it to a different room in the building. So they take this thing, 20 minutes later, it's all set up. Now we're in, like, the kitchen of the studio. Boo! I am telling you, there is a problem with the hydro. There's no sustain. So they set it up one more time. Look at this over here is not even on the same sub-panel. They move it into the very front entrance of the recording studio, like where all the people come in, where the reception is. 4 Marshall cabinets, wizard heads, turned up to like 11. Boo! And he's got that Explorer guitar, and Brandon, I shit you not, he picks it up and he throws it across the room. It's clang! And he goes, fine, there'll be no slow notes on the album. And he walks out the front door. Right? And so everyone's standing there looking at each other going, all right. And Irwin walks up to me and he goes, listen, he goes, Bruce will be back tomorrow. They're scared of Bruce. None of this crap will happen. So I go, all right, and I leave the studio. This is my first day. I am terrified. I am so terrified to go back to this record. Like, what have I got myself into? I'm going to have people screaming and yelling at me and throwing shit at me. Anyways, like Irwin said, I showed up the next day. They were as good as schoolboys the rest of the time. And actually, to Matthias's credit, I never saw him freak out ever again. Super wonderful individual, and I guess I had put my fears at rest. But I will never forget that story for as long as I live, because it just goes to show you can't judge a book by its cover, and everybody has a bad day. But it was a great Spinal Tap moment.
That's just unbelievable. I mean, it kind of kills me as a guitar player too to just be like, are you sure it's the power? Are you sure it's not your pickups? You're this, you're that, like the string. Right. Like there's a million factors, but let's go after the power. You know what I mean? Like right. And you know what? The thing was is that I asked Irwin a few days later. I go, was it the power? Was there? He said, no, everything's just the same. It's just, kind of in his head that day. All right. So what are you going to do? I guess he was having a bad day and he wasn't hearing it like he normally heard it. And I mean, don't ask me. I don't know. Just a funny moment. And, Spinal Tap does happen in every band. You and I probably have similar stories of different things at bad gigs that have happened, and you have your own bad days. Oh, for sure. So now, just before we talk about Danger, since we're still kind of on the solo stuff, tell me a bit about your second solo record, Can't Get Enough. Was this stuff written during Stick It in Your Ear? Because a lot of it sounds like it would kind of fit on that record.
Yeah, well, what's really strange about that record, that's sort of the record I never talk about because I was so angry about it when it was released. What happened is I had done a deal with the label, and those were the demos. And I think they got tired of, waiting for me to hand in the actual album. They actually released the demos as a record.
Oh, seriously? Oh, man.
Seriously. So I was so angry about it. And I talked about it a lot in the, sort of back in those days, the written press a lot, because, I'm a perfectionist, and those are just demos, and they released it as a new record. And to that degree, obviously, we stopped working together. And yeah, that's probably the worst thing that ever happened to me in terms of making albums. And I learned a big lesson. Number one, it was from that day forward, it was very, very hard for me to trust independent record labels that people would follow through on their word. So I was very happy to get the Danger offer when I did and sort of escape all that nonsense. And to this day, I've been very protective of everything that I do because I realize how easily and how quickly you can get screwed over.
Right. So kind of on that note, I mean, the band you're sort of well known for is Danger. How did you come to get hooked up with those guys? From what I know, you were like getting sued by Bruce Allen or something, or what all was going on around that time?
No, it was actually the opposite way around. I joined a lawsuit against Bruce Allen.
I meant to say you suing him. Yeah.
Yeah. So what happened is, okay, I'll tell this one really quickly, as quickly as I can. During my time with Elektra and Bruce Allen, I should say, Bruce just called me up one day and said, "Hey, kid, look, Elektra is not moving on your record in the way that it should. We really have to jump ship and go looking for a new label because, look, you're top 10 here, you're top 30 there." I said, okay. I mean, I was very confused why we would leave the record label that I'd only done one record with, but it's Bruce Allen, and you know, to me, Bruce might as well have been God because he was my manager and knew what was best for me. Little did I know that the reason that he wanted me to leave the record label was because a new owner had come in and taken over Little Mountain Studios. And I guess the biggest credit owing to Little Mountain was my album. Unbeknownst to me, Bruce had gotten the money from the label to pay for it. I think my record cost about $250,000, and there's $50,000 owing that was unpaid. And it became a pissing match between Bruce and the new studio owner. The studio owner said, "Look, you have the biggest debt here, pay your bill." And Bruce Allen was like, "You don't come in from Toronto and tell me how to run my business. I manage everyone at your recording studio," which was true. He did. He managed Fairburn, he managed Rock. And he said, "I'll pay my bill, but you're not going to tell me when." And I didn't know any of that was happening. In the meantime, he got Irving A's off to fly up with a guy named Charlie Miner, and they were going to sign me to their new label, which was called Giant. And in the meantime, I found out about all of this through the owner of Little Mountain Studios. He said, "You want to know why your record's being pulled? Because Bruce hasn't paid the studio bill. And that's why your record is now getting pulled off the shelves over a legal argument over the owner of the masters of your record." So I am just, my head is spinning, and I'm in my early 20s, you know, and I had no one to tell me to, you know, hang in there. I was just incredibly hurt by it, and I felt incredibly kind of messed over, especially because Bruce had known my childhood and how, you know, I left home so early, and he always said to me, "I respect that you pulled up your boots and, you know, made all this happen yourself." So when I was getting screwed over a $50,000 studio bill that he already had the money for, I was extremely hurt, and I fired him. So that was the end of my career with him and with Elektra, and that kind of made it very hard for me to move in the music industry for a while. In the meantime, what ended up happening a couple of years later, while I was floundering out there, unbeknownst to me, Danger had hired Erwin Musper, who was the engineer on my record, the Scorpions record I just talked about, because they wanted Bruce Fairburn to produce the record, and Bruce was not available. And Erwin had said, you know, "I'll produce your record." Their favorite record at the time was my album. I should add that in. And they wanted that.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow, that's a pretty big compliment.
Yeah, so that's how I met them. They wanted that Paul Lane sound on their new album. And so Erwin said, I was the engineer on that record, I can get you that same sound. So that's how he started working with them, and then they bugged him incessantly to get my phone number. And so during the recording of that album, the Monkey Business album, or Screwed, or whatever it's called, Steve West and Bruno Ravel would call me up and go, "Hey man, what are you doing?" Blah, blah, blah. So we started a phone friendship for about a year. And then one day they called me and said, "We're letting Ted go. We're having too many difficulties. Would you consider coming to New York and joining Danger?" And at that point, I was still in the middle of a lawsuit, and I was like, yes. This is just a ball being lobbed from the universe. Take me. So that's it. I jumped on a plane, and I went to New York, and that was that. And I still lived on Vancouver Island, and I lived in New York. So the commute to work was amazing.
Good 5-hour flight right there, or something like that.
Yeah, right. Yeah, so that was my start in Danger in the early 90s.
So tell me kind of about the early days, and you show up and you guys just, party the whole time, and like, did you join them and go tour, or what sort of happened when you get to New York now?
Well, so what happened is, first things first, I meet them in New York, and we hit it off. I do an audition, basically at a pub. Their buddy, Tony Bruno, was playing guitar. And he was sort of an original member from way back, but he had a band called Soraya as well, and at that time was with Joan Jett.
Oh, yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Yep, great band.
Yeah, by the way, now he plays with Enrique and makes more money than anybody I know. But
oh, I can imagine.
Right. So, anyways, do a quick audition in a pub, and people go nuts. I think I sang a Bon Jovi song, and I fly out, and then they call me about 3 days later and said, how soon can you be in the studio? I said, as soon as you like. I meet them at La Studio, I think a couple weeks later in...
Morin Heights.
Morin Heights, yeah. And,
that's incredible. Well,
right.
There's a legendary studio for you.
There you go. And I'm a huge Rush fan, so I was psyched. But when I arrived, it was like minus 50, man. It was winter time, right? So, I'd never experienced that cold ever. And so in 3 days, I recorded the Cockroach record, which was a record that was already done and completed with Ted singing. So they just removed all the vocals, and then I re-sang over top of that. And so that.
So what? Now, what I gotta say, because I love that record, by the way. So what happened? Did they send you Ted's version and say basically learn this version of the album, or
exactly what they did is they send me. They go, this is how Ted sang it. We want you to put your thing on it. So they sent me 2 copies. They sent me a version with him and then a version with no vocals on, so that I could, A, practice singing to it before I arrived at the studio, and B, so that I could kind of feel it out how I would feel it.
So now, like that, because that album didn't come out for like 10 years or something after it was done. What happened with all of that?
Well, so now we're excited, or I'm excited, because Sony is hopping up and down about the record. And I was freaked out, man. When I arrived there, I knew that taking the place of a singer in a kind of popular band was going to be tough from the record label point of view, because they're going to be like, how are we going to promote this? What I didn't know is that, yes, I had the job in the band as far as the band was concerned, but obviously the label had to approve what I'd done in the studio. So I found out, when I got home, how excited the label was about it. So I felt great. And they thought, this is a good direction for the band, and this sort of, revitalize it. It has a new sound. And the next thing that happens, about a month later, boom, another lawsuit. Ted.
Oh, my goodness.
Ted's dad was a lawyer, too, right? So Ted took a $25 million lawsuit against Sony and $20 million against the band. So now I am back to square one. So this album is not coming out anytime soon. So I'm at home licking my wounds for the next year, going, okay, what do I do now? And so
basically, like 93 or 94, whatever that would have been. Basically, you just sort of sat in limbo, not knowing what the heck to do. Right,
and now I'm in 2 lawsuits, and I'm trying to figure out my life. So one day, the guys call me and go, look, we've gone to Sony and said, during this lawsuit, we've had enough. We still have to be able to work. So you're either going to let us do another record with you while we're waiting for this one to be done, or you're going to free us up to go continue working. And Sony was very good. And at the time, let's face it, grunge had taken over. So bands like Danger Danger, they were dropping like flies. So Sony allowed us to continue on without, having to put out records through them, because they weren't going to pick up another option. So that's what we did. And then we decided, in earnest, that maybe we would just create a whole new band, since no one had heard me yet with them, and we were going to write a whole bunch of new material. Maybe it should just be a new band, which is what we agreed to do. And we wrote the Dawn record, which was kind of a very indicative record of its time. It wasn't, hair metal anymore. Oh, of course. Yeah, I mean, you had so many bands, like Warrant and Skid Row, and just tons of bands were really changing their whole sound to sort of go in with grunge, that whole, innovate or die, basically, in that industry. Right, you got it. And I just thought, well, look, I'm from the Pacific Northwest, and my taste had changed, too. As long as it had guitars in it, I liked it, and I love what the Stone Temple Pilots were doing. I like what Alice in Chains were doing. I just thought, well, we can do that kind of stuff. So we did. We wrote a record, and I thought it was going to come out under a completely different name. And about 2 weeks before it got released, the guys in Danger Danger freaked out and went, we're not going to sell anything or be able to book any tours, so they put it out as Danger Danger. I think we all regretted it. I mean, I regretted it, but, it's ancient history now.
Oh, of course. So what was the band originally going to be called? Do you even remember? Or?
we had to work. The guys flew up here from New York and stayed at my house. We have a studio here. They stayed at my house for about 3 months. And while we were writing the record, one day Bruno and I went out in Parksville and filled up his car, or my car, full of gas. And he got covered in gasoline, right? He overfilled it. Mm-hmm. And he's like, let's call the band Gasoline Bath. So I think that was our working title for the longest time. Gasoline Bath.
Oh, my God.
That's so bad, right?
It would have been a pretty decent grunge name for a band, though. Like, it kind of fits.
Right. Gasoline Bath, man. We may see the return of it one day.
Oh, my God. Oh, man.
Right now, there's some kid out there listening going, I'm going to steal that.
Yeah, totally. That's great. As far as, the other 2 records you did with those guys, like I know 4 and Gildersleeves, like that, the sound of that's much more in line with classic Danger Danger. What do you remember about the writing and recording of those albums?
Well, when I joined Danger Danger, Steve and Bruno were the 2 writers, right? They were the masterminds behind Danger Danger. So when I came in and we did the Dawn record, before these 2 records you're talking about, the grunge record, let's just call it that.
Yep.
That was the first time we'd been in a room together and had written together. Now, they were fans of my writing, and I was fans of their writing. But being a third wheel in a relationship, it was very, very tough. So writing the Dawn record was so painful that I made a deal with them that we wouldn't write together. I would hand in, when a new record came in, I would hand in my songs. They would hand in their songs. If any one of us needed a bit of help, that's what we would do. So that's how we worked it. I kind of wrote the sort of power pop guitar stuff on those records, and then they turned in the more Danger-esque songs. And so that's how we worked right up till the very end. Just so that, because we were all friends, but we wanted to remain friends, and we understood that it was very, very hard to be in the same room.
Now, tell me, how does the band really continue going? Because at this time, a lot of bands in Danger Danger's sort of sound, melodic hard rock, so forth, a lot of them kind of dropped off the planet, and Danger Danger obviously continued during that time. Were there still labels looking to sign you guys, or did you guys just kind of soldier on and say, we're going to do this, and hopefully someone will like it and pick it up kind of thing?
Well, it was a little bit of both. First of all, one word, Europe. Europe had record labels and people that were still fans of the music, and I think they saw us soldiering on and gave us a break. There's one guy, I have to say, a guy named Magnus Soderqvist, and he worked at a label called MTM.
Oh,
and
yep,
he was so great with us. Yeah, he continued to give us, record deals. And promoters loved the band because they put on a great show. So, we would tour Europe a lot, and we'd tour the States, and we would just keep going. And people kept showing up. So, were we playing arenas anymore? No, those days were over. But we were still doing a sizable crowd, and so, it's rock and roll, man. If you got shows to play and you got records to put out, you're happy regardless.
Oh, for sure. So I know in the early 2000s you did the Shoegazer record. What kind of transpired between sort of your end of the time with the band? Did you just kind of go, we've had our fun, that's it? Or did it just kind of fizzle out? Or what kind of happened with the end of Danger Danger?
Well, on a personal note, for me, it was more about, I'd always been a solo artist in my mind. That's how I got into the music business. And then being part of a band, although it was great, you can only paint in so many colors, right? Because you're one part of 3 writers. So every time that I was doing another Danger Danger record, I always thought, this is my last record with them, because this can't keep going on, number one. Because the state of the music industry for our type of music in all of the 90s, man, it was tough. Right? It really was tough. I kept thinking, we won't get another record deal. So I was always in earnest writing my next record. And so I put together a bunch of material, and then Danger Danger would get another contract, and Steve and Bruno would look at me and go, well, what songs have you got? And I would be like, damn it. Now I got to give up. I got to give up these songs I was writing for my next record to the Danger Danger record. So finally, in the early 2000s, Magnus had come to me and said, I love what you write for Danger Danger. And he said, I know that you're always working on a solo record. He goes, maybe you would come make a record for me. Would you consider it? And he offered me a fair amount of money to say yes. So I went, well, that's my sign, isn't it? I can go do this. It's been long enough with Danger Danger. And, I put 12 years in with the band. So I thought I either take this and have fun with it, or I don't take it and I always regret the one thing that I wanted. So that's how Shoegazer came about, and I said to the guys, I think it's time that I go. And on my end, you have my blessing if you want to pick up back with Ted, if you guys can kind of salvage a relationship or whatever, I'm not going to be unhappy, because we were all very close friends at this point in time. And I think part of me likes to think that they would at least want to know how I felt if they were going to bring Ted back in. So I thought, I'm going to leave and just say it. And that is what ended up happening. And I think it's been great for them. And we've stayed in touch ever since. And in fact, Bruno and I still work together to this day, obviously with the Defiants. But Bruno mixes everything that I, record. And so, yeah, it's been a great working relationship my whole life.
Oh, that's fantastic. And obviously, continuing that onwards. So a couple years later, after the Shoegazer disc, you did Anderson-Laine-Readman. How did that all come about? That was a pretty interesting record as well.
That's the word I wouldn't use. That was a favor to my manager. My manager, a guy named Michael Rayton, managed a band called Royal Hunt.
Oh, yep, big fan of them. Yep.
Right, and so Andre Anderson was the keyboard player-writer for Royal Hunt. And so my manager calls me up one day and he said, would you, and he's a Russian guy, I'm not going to say no. Yes, I'm wondering if you would like to, I'm making him sound like Borat. Anyways, if you could do me a favor and sing on this record, sing a few songs. I said, sure, okay. That's all that was. I literally got the recordings. I did one take of every vocal and I sent it back. I mean, I knew it wasn't something that I really wanted to do or felt close to, but you do favors in this business for the people that you love, and that is one of the ones that I did.
So that they didn't send you like finished vocals or anything on that. It's just kind of like, here's the track, do with it what you will kind of thing.
No, they actually did send me a scratch vocal. Please sing it like this, because I wouldn't know what to do with that music. I wouldn't. To me, it was more of like a 70s guy. And I agreed to sing. I think I sang on 3 songs, which is why it has different singers on it. And I even told Misha or Michael, my manager, look, someone else needs to be singing this because I think I will do this record a disservice, but, I said I would, so here goes.
Right. Okay, so I know there's sort of, like, at least in your discography, from what I can tell, there's sort of a bit of a break between that and the Dark Horse album. What were you doing in the meantime? Were you just, working on music and that kind of thing? Or had you started Dark Horse a lot earlier?
No, not at all. I decided after, first things first, with the Tenzia, which was the label that signed Shoegazer, Tenzia was a label that Magnus, the guy who had signed all the Danger Danger albums.
MTM, yep.
MTM, right. He worked for MTM. He was offered the position of president of the label at Tenzia, and I was the first artist that he signed. So part of the thing is that he said, look, this label's going to be run like a major label, a lot of money, very, very small amount of artists. So that's also how I got wooed into doing it. And in the first year, the label changed their way of doing business, and Magnus quit. So Shoegazer was just starting to do something. And with Magnus leaving the label, I went, you know what? I've had it. I don't even know what to do. I'm so lost, and every time that I try and get somewhere, there's a lawsuit or a changing of the guard. And I was worn out. So I went, maybe what I should do is try and grow up, whatever that means, and just, run a recording studio and get into film, television, just write spots and do that kind of thing. So that's what I did. I moved to Vancouver and opened up a studio called Fuse. For 7 years, I worked doing that. I would work, and I played the clubs at night. So I lived this insane life where 6 nights a week I would play at the Roxy in Vancouver till 3 in the morning, and then I would start work at my corporate studio job from 10 in the morning till 7 at night. I slept 3 hours a night for 7 years.
Oh my goodness, that's insane.
Insane. So finally, as you can imagine, I was sick all the time, and around 2012, I had started writing some country music because Tommy Mack from Headley is a pal of mine, and he said, hey, would you ever consider writing, there's a country artist named Stacey McKittrick, maybe you would, maybe you consider like throwing your hat in the ring and writing a song or two for her. And I'm like, man, Tommy, I don't know anything, but sure, I'll try. And so I wrote a couple songs. I was listening to, what was going on in country music, and I'm going, she's pretty cool. And I ended up writing a couple songs for Stacey, and then I ended up going down to Nashville and finding out I kind of had an ability to do this. And then I found out all the other guys who wrote rock were now writing country, because country was very sort of indicative of what 80s rock was.
Well, I think one of my favorite writers, he describes it as, basically country just took all of that ethos from the 80s, updated it for 2015 or 16 or whatever, and then just, threw a fiddle in the mix somewhere, and that's modern country, is basically 80s rock repackaged. Right.
So I just didn't even think about it. I just kept, writing songs for other people. One job led to another job. And then I had these songs that I would write, and I would just kind of put them off to the side. I go, I sound better singing this than, I don't even know who to shop it to. So I'm in I'm in Nashville, and I end up talking to Bruce Boughton, who's like the steel player on every big country record you've ever heard, pretty much. He played on the Shania Twain stuff, Keith Urban, blah, blah, blah. I go, listen, man, do you want to listen to my demos and tell me, like, if I'm no good, just tell me that, and I will go away. But, if I have anything to say, let me know. He was very gracious. He listened to my stuff, and he said, you're great. He said, you need to be doing this. So you want to make a record, basically? Whoever you want on your album, I'll get for you. So that's how I ended up working on the Dark Horse records. Got the bass player from Brad Paisley on half of it, bass player from Keith Urban on the other half, same guys who played on the Rascal Flatts records. I just sort of had this Nashville royalty thrown at my feet, and I will be forever indebted to Bruce Boughton for that, for saying yes and for telling me that I could do it, because it was a blast. I think about it more like Southern rock. I don't really think about it so much like country, because I'm not. I think that. Yeah,
I'm not really a country fan, but I mean, even for me, like, I can throw that on, listen to it, and it's like, that's really cool, because it is sort of hard rock, but country. Like, it straddles that world very, very well.
Yeah, I thank you. I like to think so too. It's sort of I couldn't put my finger on it, but I go. Look, I grew up listening to Bob Seger and Springsteen. Those are my giant songwriter heroes when I was a kid. And I kind of go in 38 Special, all that kind of stuff. There's elements of all that in there. It is what it is, right? I let everyone else decide what it is. I just can't say it's this or that. And to me, Southern rock is about as close as I could get.
So I guess this kind of brings us up to the new record with the Defiants. So tell me how this all came together. Like you said, you're still friends with Bruno and so forth, but why sort of now to sort of throw together kind of Danger 2.0 almost, as far as membership is concerned?
Right. Well, Bruno mixed the Dark Horse record. So, like I said, we worked together in the studio, and Frontiers, which is the label that signed the Defiants, Serafino, the president of that label, offers me a record deal every year, a solo record deal. He has since 2012. And I have always said no, because, I was doing Dark Horse, and I won't do anything if I don't feel like it's the right time to do it. So last May, Bruno calls me up, and he goes, Serafino just offered a deal for you and I to do a record. Isn't that funny? So we're laughing about it, and I'm going, I don't know, man. He goes, well, I'm just putting it out there because I know you, and you say no to everything. Love this nature, but, would you consider it? So I said, well, can I have a week? And he said, yeah. So then I just thought, I did it for sentimental reasons. I thought, when am I ever going to write with Bruno? And we're the age that we are. And I thought, this is a once-in-a-lifetime chance to make a record with him. So that's the reason why I want to do it. So I said yes, and both of us kind of went, we have no idea what we're doing. So I said, okay, let's work. He lives in New York, I live here, and the guitar player lives in Sweden. So logistically, we're going to use the net to write. So how it worked was, we just opened up Dropbox, and I said, look, I'll just send you my ideas, you send me your ideas, and that's how it started. And 2 months later, we had 33 songs.
Oh my God, wow. In 2 months' time, that's unreal.
Yeah, it's 2 months. The floodgates just opened. It was just like, he was excited about what I'd be sending back. He's like more of the, guitar riff, drum, bass guy, and I was like melody lyric guy, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So it ended up being a great marriage because, A, I didn't have to do all the normal work that I'd have to do, which is book a drum room and work with the drummer and do all of that. I could just write and arrange, and Bruno could produce. So it just ended up, we were both really proud. We had no idea what the record would sound like. And I just said, I'm just going to write whatever the hell I want to write. And that's what came out.
Did you guys go in, like, when the record contract came through and everything, was it kind of like, hey, we're looking for, kind of melodic hard rock, obviously, or is that just sort of what you guys naturally write? Like, was that kind of the plan to begin with?
Okay, so I'll tell you the honest story behind it. The deal I made with Bruno was that I would take no money. So the thing is that the record label, they put up 50% advance on the entire record. I said, look, put the money in escrow, because if you hate what I'm doing, because I'm not writing to suit anybody's taste. I'm going to write what I feel like writing. Yeah, I know it's got to be a rock record, but I'm just going to write whatever I want to write. And if you don't like what I'm writing, then no harm, no foul. No one's taking the money. And if you choose to pull out of the deal, then great, no problem. So that's how I did it, because I'm not good with having anyone look over my shoulder, and I'm terrible at having people tell me what to do, because it just makes me not want to do it. If that makes any sense. I just want to do, I trust myself that I'm going to write something good, because I can't, I beat myself up so badly every time I'm making a record. I won't stand for anything less than what is sort of my best work at that time. So that was my feeling, and the label said, okay, let's do it that way. So I didn't make any money until the record was absolutely handed in and finished, and the record label had it. It was like a hostage situation. We'll hand over the masters, you can hand over the money. Normally what happens is they give you 50%, and then the record label yells at you until it's done. You're going to make the deadlines? So,
yeah, for sure. No, what an inspiring way to work, though, just to say, hey, let's see. I think it's funny because on the one hand, there's almost more pressure to succeed, and on the other hand, there's almost less, because you get to sort of do what comes naturally, as opposed to you're trying to please someone as you're doing it.
Well, yeah, and let's put it this way to make it even more clear. Not taking any money for 7 months means starving for 7 months on a chance that the record label is going to like it, because remember, I set up how I was going to work. So there's that too. So yeah, you're right. It better be good. And I think you just got to put your balls on the line. If you really walk the walk and talk the talk, you really got to deliver.
Now, I know, like, on this record, you really let loose as a singer. Like, there's some great screams on, Waiting on a Heartbreak.
Sure.
How do you keep your voice in such great shape after so many years?
Well, I live a super healthy lifestyle, and the voice box is just a muscle, man. And so if you that's like saying to a guy who's a bodybuilder who's 60 and has the body of a 30-year-old, well, how do you do it? Well, it's pretty obvious how you do it. You just keep working those muscles, and right? So it's the same thing for me. It's like I'm singing all the time in the studio, literally every day. If I'm not singing on my own stuff, I'm singing on other people's stuff. And I take care of myself. And so that's that. And, I guess part of it would be genetics too. So, I don't really know how else to answer that question except that way.
For sure. It makes perfect sense. Now, also, when it comes to touring, like, I know you talked about being in bars several years ago and playing 6 nights a week. Do you still do much touring?
Well, this year's been a nutty year for me, because I've basically been traveling since March. So, yeah, I went over, I did a Frontiers Festival, played Italy in April, and then turned around, got home for 4 days, flew to Australia in March and played Paul Lane's solo stuff and Danger Danger stuff with a band called Radio Sun down in Australia. Now I'm home doing Danger Danger shows. I play Merritt, the Merritt Mountain Music Festival out here with Sam Hunt and a whole bunch of other country artists. Playing with Michelle Wright this summer. Trooper Chilliwack. Yeah, lots and lots of Dark Horse dates. And then in October, I head back to the UK, and we start off at Rockingham in Nottingham with the Defiants again. So
so the Defiants are doing live shows then?
That's right. Yeah. We started in Italy this spring.
Okay, I'm sorry. I thought that was a solo show. So you are actually doing Defiant stuff. What sort of things are you putting in the set list?
So we play about 4 songs off the new Defiance record, and then the rest is kind of my history with Danger Danger. And then I throw in, of course, I have to play Doriana, off of the first solo record. So that's in every show. So yeah, it's just kind of the songs that I was involved with, plus the Defiance, spanning, God, it's almost a couple decades. That's hard. That's hard to say, Brandon. That's hard to say. But yeah, so that's what the show basically consists of. And as the Defiance, the Defiance record's kind of been taken off, we entered Billboard when we were in Italy, which was crazy. I won't lie to you, man. I was in Venice, and I got the label sent me the email, and you guys hit, number 41 on the Heat Seekers chart. I started crying. It's been 20-something years since I've been to Billboard. So nice moment this year. I don't really care about anything else. That was a great moment.
Oh, for sure. Now, you said you guys have 30-something songs and you are touring. Can we expect another record from you guys?
Well, look, Frontiers has a second option with us, so if they exercise that option, then yes. If they don't exercise that option, then yes. Bruno and I came to the agreement the other day that we would continue the Defiance on no matter what, just because, A, it's so much fun. Writing that record was effortless. There's just so much fun that we'd be crazy not to do it again. And the record's selling really well. So there's another reason to keep going. I mean, art is nothing without commerce. So it's nice that people are buying it and would want to hear another Defiance record.
Oh, for sure. Well, I'll tell you up front, I've absolutely loved the record, and I really hope you guys do another one. You sort of talked a little bit about this, but Defiance aside, what else can we expect from you as an artist? Do you think you'll do another Dark Horse album, any more solo stuff in the pipeline, that kind of thing?
Yeah, well, I'm in the middle right now of doing the second Dark Horse record, which was written before the Defiance record was written. So I'm finishing that off all summer while I'm playing Dark Horse shows on the weekend. And then Bruno and I start the new Defiance record in November. And Frontiers just offered me a solo record contract 1 week ago.
Oh, so we're going to hear a little bit of everything. Oh, that's fantastic.
Right. So this will be the first Paul Lane solo record in, 20-something years. So that's kind of the next 3 years booked up for me. So I'm back to not sleeping very much and running 3 projects, Brandon, is, am I crazy? I wake up every day and I go, this is nuts. Man, I should maybe put one to the side, but then I go, I'm almost 50. Forget it. I'm going to keep going.
Yep, sleep when you're dead, right?
You got it.
That's great. Well, Paul, I want to thank you so much for taking the time out to do this interview. This was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed this, and like you mentioned, effortless with the Defiance. It was effortless just getting to sit back and hear all of your stories. So I want to thank you so much.
Thanks, Brandon. I'm sorry they were long-winded. After every interview where somebody allows me to talk, I always hang up the phone and I have long-winded, rambling remorse.
This was a blast. Thanks so much. And if you want to do this again, next Defiance record, I'd love to have you back.
You got it. It'd be my pleasure, Brandon. No problem. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Paul. Yep. Thanks so much. You have a good one.
All right.
All right.
Okay, man. Bye.